think some of the sweetest words, we talk about wonderful words of life, that we might hear is, your cancer is cured. That'd be thrilling to the person who had that, and to the family who bears that burden with them. Words are powerful. They have a tremendous way of either building us up or tearing us down. I want to talk about a word tonight that I think is extremely important to us as Christians. That's the word faith. Faith makes things real. Matter of fact, the lesson would be, I guess, titled, A Real Faith Makes a Real Difference. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. God gives us a definition of faith here tonight, and I know many of you could probably quote this in 2 or 3 different translations, but let's just start and look at it once again, examine it a bit, and talk about some of the things that would line up with this in this chapter, and then the first part of chapter 12 of what it means for us. We have something to take home with us. So chapter 11, beginning in verse 1, God writes to us, originally to a group of Christians who were struggling with their faith. They were wishy-washy, I'd say at least, but many of them were being pressured to go back to their Judaism background, and thus the word Hebrews is the title, because it's written to those who came out of Judaism or the Jewish religion and went into Christianity, which was God's plan. But now because of the pressures, possibly economical, family-wise, etc., they were being pressured to go back, and calling possibly into mind a second questioning just what was going on. Getting now to the point after the author here spends a lot of time comparing Christianity to the Jewish faith, to the Jewish religion. He says, now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. I think of substance as something that you can put your hands on. It might not be watery in a sense, but even water you can hold in your hands. But it is something that you can grab a hold of. And the definer here, whoever he is, I keep wanting to say the Apostle Paul, we're not sure that's the absolute person because he doesn't tell in the beginning of the letter who actually wrote it. But this person here, inspired of God, tells us it's a substance of the things that we're hoping for. It's something you can grab a hold of and hang on to. You're hoping for it, but you don't have it yet. But you know, because it's worthwhile and so strongly there that you can hold it, that you're going to get that because there's a substance in your hands already. So this faith, the author says to start with, is a substance of the things hoped for. And then he says an evidence of the things not yet seen. Evidence, that's a word we hear quite often if you're involved in court cases. Or, well, let's examine the evidence and see if this is really true. We'll examine this, and of course you go through all the different things and say, okay, I conclude because of the evidence here that this is guilty or not guilty or right or wrong or whatever it is. Because you're looking and examining real things, concrete things. And it's strange as we talk about it as an evidence of the things that we don't see. How do you have an evidence of things you don't see? Well, actually there are circumstantial evidences or evidence that imply a lot of things, and they become evidences of themselves. So we don't see God. But when we walk outside this door, matter of fact, if we just stand in here, we can say, these physical things didn't come about because of nothing. I would say, well, man built it. But built it out of what? Out of material. Where did the material come from? And ultimately, we've got to come down that there's a God that put this world together, that caused it or called it into existence. The world's not going to last forever. The evidence that science concludes about the earth is it's winding down, which means it had a big start somewhere. Science will want to say it was a big bang. But what banged? Something had always been there. Something that in and of itself is self-existent, doesn't need anything else. God. And so this is the evidence of things we don't see yet, but we will someday. I can see a lot of other things about God and just looking at the universe and all the things that are out there. And I can see His design and His wisdom and His power and the love and the thing. And God's got to be an artist. Just look at a sunset. And look at the worlds. And look at the colors that are there. Someone here visited this morning. He says, I live out west. He said, when I first went out that direction, he said, we were landing. I looked down and saw the brown cactuses and this and that. And I thought to myself, oh, why am I leaving Tennessee? He liked the colors. I like colors. But here's the thing is that all of these things that we look at are evidences about something that's so real that it cries out to us. The psalmist talks about these things and it says, day into day, uttereth forth speech, night into night. Talking about the wisdom of God. Those are evidences of things. But we're not talking just about God's existence. We're talking about not just a faith that I believe that God exists, but a real faith that gives us something to hold on to that makes us do things different than the rest of the world. That makes a difference in our life. And that's what the author here begins to talk about as he describes his faith. He says, verse 3, by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which were not made out of things which are visible. So it came out of nothing, in other words. Verse 4, then by faith Abel, way back in the Old Testament, back in Genesis, back in chapter 4 here. By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. Remember Cain and Abel? There's a problem there. And the problem existed really over Cain's envy about his brother, because somehow or another he could tell that God liked his sacrifice. And so you go back to that chapter 4 and you start reading what's going on there. And so this piece right here refers all the way back to what Cain and Abel did. And so let's read it again. By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. See, Cain offered something, but it wasn't pleasing. And through which he, that is now talking about Abel, obtained witness that he was righteous. God testifying of his gifts, and through it, him being dead, he still speaks. His works, what he did, still cries out to us, even though he's been dead thousands of years. We still talk about him and the decisions that he made, the sacrifices that he made in comparison to his brother. And the fact is, yes, he was the first person that died as far as we can see in the scriptures here, but yet this person, his testimony still speaks to us because of his faith. He chose to offer a different sacrifice. The type of worship that we offer to God based upon our faith will be good or not good, acceptable or not acceptable. Not by just believing that God exists, because Cain believed God exists. He was offering sacrifices, but something was lacking in what he offered. When I could read in it, it wasn't a real sacrifice. It was just gathering up, as opposed to his brother who was bringing the first fruits of the best of his sacrifice. What a difference. Giving God the best and taking second best for yourself and taking it home, as opposed to Cain. Testimony, verse 5. By faith, Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death. Now we're moving a little further along, still in the early books of Genesis, and a character's name pops up in this long list of genealogies of people that lived hundreds of years. Methuselah's listed in there too. 969 years. That's a long time to live. I don't know if I want to live that long. What changes did he see? I don't know. Probably not as much as we see in 5 years in our day and time, the way things change. And yet, here's this guy Enoch who did something different. And you go back and you read it, it doesn't say a whole lot about it. It just says that Enoch walked with God. The rest of the world wasn't walking with God. And he chose to walk differently. And now as we're reading the comments of the Hebrew author, it says, by faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death. And he was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. his faith pleased God. But not just the feeling inside his faith pleased God. Like God could look in and he could see, oh, I know that you really believe I exist. But his faith caused him to walk a different walk. And that testimony, that demonstration of his faith is what pleased God. It caused him to have a different action because he had a different faith. He was going about things differently, and God saw that. And as one person talked about, Enoch was walking with God one day, and God says, you know what? We're closer to my house than yours. Why don't you come home with me? It's kind of a neat way of expressing it, but the fact is, God took him home. He didn't die. And what a testimony that is. So as we're looking at this idea of faith, and we're examining this word, which is so basic to our Christian belief, but so important on a day-to-day battle, to understand that our faith demonstrates or makes a difference in what we choose to do. Now verse 6. But without faith, we just got through reading it, Enoch's faith pleased God. But without faith, it's impossible to please him. For he that comes to God, you can put these down in points if you want. Number one, must believe that he is. Primary, God exists. But secondary, or right along with it, I guess, and that he's the rewarder of those who seek him diligently. Now we go back to Cain and Abel's situation here. Cain obviously believed God exists. He was offering sacrifice. But he missed the second part. And so he wouldn't offer his best to God. But his brother did. Because he knew that God was a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. You see, there's really where the distinction's made about a real faith. The faith that causes us to choose things from the way the world would look at it would be kind of foolish. I mean, why are you giving that kind of money to the church? You can't write off that much money with the IRS. I don't know if anybody's given that much or not. I know of some Christians that have done that. He was a very wealthy guy back some time ago. And it wasn't him that told me, it was somebody else. And the accountants that this guy had were scratching their head and saying, hey, you can't deduct anymore. Stop giving. He said, I'm not giving just because I'm looking for deductions. I'm giving because these people need some things. And it caused him to choose to do things differently. He gave differently because of his faith, you see. And so here is a long list of people in chapter 11. We're not going to go through all of them. But as you go through and you'll see these guys that are listed, verse 7, Noah, and then starting in verse 8, Abraham. It'll talk about Sarah, and it'll start naming some more. And then finally, the guy feels like we're running out of room, and he just starts listing people in the latter part of chapter 11. And then after he gets through listing, he says, what can we say more? And he just names a few more just in case, you know. And then he starts talking about all these things that happen because of their faith. We move down to the New Testament time, and we think about what Jesus said, oftentimes even to his own disciples. O ye of, finish the sentence. You know that. You ever feel like we'd be right there with them in what we're doing? Apostles couldn't work a miracle on a certain case, and Jesus came and said, oh, you of little faith. And when the storms were just hurling this boat all around, and the apostles in there, and even the seasoned fishermen who know how to handle boats are in there, and the storm was so great they were freaking out, as you could say in modern terms, and they wake up, Jesus, save us. Like, what does a carpenter have to do about saving us out on the sea? But they knew Jesus, you see. They knew him enough to know that he could do something. And the first thing he did was, oh, you of little faith. Well, they knew to wake him up. He was the one that was going to fix everything. It was a pretty good faith. As opposed to, come on, Peter, row, you're used to doing this. You're the fisherman. Get your brother James and John. Let's get going here. And they may have started there, but it didn't make any good. The waking Jesus. Oh, you of little faith. I don't know what a big faith is, actually. I do feel my faith a whole lot more like the fellow who came to Jesus and his child was having a terrible time, possessed with a demon. And this is a situation where the apostles couldn't cast the demon out. And Jesus asked, how long has the child been like this? And since he was a youth. And the demons oftentimes would throw him into fire or into water, try and destroy him. Can you imagine just hanging on to your child all the way through life? And, you know, it's bad enough when we walk out the door on Sunday mornings and you got a hold of these little 2-year-old and 3-year-olds in their cars are driving by on Vine Street and you've got a hold of their hand. Don't turn loose of them. But eventually you feel like I can let loose in certain circumstances. This dad never could. He didn't know what was going to happen next. And Jesus said, I can take care of this if you believe. And the man's response was, I believe, help my unbelief. He had the foundation, but he knew it wasn't big enough, or he felt like it wasn't. And I feel right at home with that statement so often. My faith at times causes me to make a big difference, to do something. And at times, I'm afraid, or I don't step out, or I don't measure up, or I choose sin. And at times, I don't do right. And I can hear afterwards Jesus calling out my mind, oh, little faith there, David. Now, what influences our faith? Because we want it up there. We want it to be strong. We want to measure up every battle and win. We don't want Satan to win in any situation. We want to be able to not only do that, but to be able to touch lives and change people and help them in all these different ways. We want to be strong all the way through. We want to ride through the difficulties of life and people to approach us and be able to just help them smooth it out. We want to be that kind of strength, like Jesus was. So how do we get there? I don't know if we'll ever get that high, but can I move it an inch? Can I get it up some? Romans 15:4, as we're doing right now, it reminds us of this exercise we're going through. Paul now, as he's writing this letter, says, for whatever things were written before, he's talking about the Old Testament. Now, the Old Testament law in itself, as far as us as Christians, is not in effect anymore. But there's a great deal of strength and help to be learned in going through and reading and studying that. For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, now in the Christian age, through the patience and the comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. It strengthens me. So here's the thing. When I'm going through this exercise of reading about these guys in Hebrews chapter 11, I get fired up because I see that faith. I want that faith. I'm going through and I'm reminding myself and challenging myself and saying, they did it, I ought to be able to do it too. They're human beings. They're not Bible people. They're people that lived in Bible times that just happen to have their names in there. Yes, they're great men and some super people as far as that goes. But the fact is, if the Bible were written today, I think some of our names would be in there. I hope so in some way or form whatsoever, but not on the bad side, you see. But the fact is that we're just talking about human beings that measured up and they got their names there. And so here's what we're looking at is, they did it, I can do it. I just need to have that faith. Were they weak at times? Yeah. David, you bet. Noah, yes. Abraham, yes. Matter of fact, you can go through the list and every one of them has weaknesses. I like reading their weaknesses. That's why I can laugh at them. Boy, I can see the humanity there. And I can be inspired that they made it in spite of. And they rose up out of that. And so now, when I go through and read these things, What comes alive is the potential of a human being rising to have the faith that God wants us to have. And so thus the list in chapter 11 about all these things that these guys did. And then when you think about it, you know that they also were human and they had their issues, but yet not what they're looking at today and not what God's saying to us. That their faith made a difference in how they touched lives and what they did. Matter of fact, in John chapter 20, although John is alluding to Jesus himself, he said, the things that are written in this book, written that you might believe, and believing have eternal life. Well, the things that are written in the New Testament, you see, are there to help establish our faith. Could have been a lot more things included, is what John is saying here, but these are written, and there's enough here to make a strong faith. It's a reminder of what God is teaching us. And the fact is that even as human beings, we can measure up. And we can be strong. And we can move that up that ladder just a bit. And be stronger in our faith. So, Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, as the author says, it's written, therefore. What's there is written for a reason. Therefore, he says, we also, as Christians in this day and time, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. He just got through giving us this list of these great Bible characters. Noah, Abraham, Enoch, and all these people. They're watching. Included in that, I believe, are other people that we know in our times. Elders and people that are strong in the faith and women that have been strong with their lives. And we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses of all these people that have lived a life of faith and made a difference. And what's happening is we're getting a cheering crowd sense here. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses as are watching us, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race set before us. And then he adds something else in here to remind us where we got to be looking, because we're not just running wherever, but looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher, the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So out of all that we're looking at here, a real faith makes a real difference. Don't ever sell yourself short on what you do and the impact that you're making. It may not be written down in some archive somewhere, but it's engraved on the hearts of individuals to see the consistency. And the difficulties that you endure are just crying out even louder. You're believing and trusting and living in spite of. And it speaks to these people. And so we become witnesses for this in a very real sense of what is achievable. And all of these things tell us that our faith makes a difference. So don't give up on it. Hold fast to it. Keep digging deep into the Word and reading the lives of these people, because it moves us up that ladder and makes it what we want it to be. Little faith? Yeah. But it can be stronger. Do your exercises and reading through, especially picking out characters in here that just remind you of what we're about, what we're doing as Christians, and let it challenge you. Pray about it. And God bless you. If you're achieving it or striving to achieve it, He'll bless you with it. It's time as we close our lesson. If your faith is weak and you feel like you need to come forward, there's space down front. We'll pray with you. We'll do whatever we can to help you. And we'll keep on encouraging you. For every one of us that are in this audience tonight, very well know that it's a challenge, it's a difficult thing, but it's workable and it's measurable, and we can make a difference. If you're not a Christian tonight, would you come right down front? and be baptized in Christ. Make that commitment tonight while we sing. Would you